Hi friends, both joining us on the Zoom and watching later, and also everyone here. We're going to start the second session of this AI Studio series on the origins and historical development of the Armenian language with Dr. Hrach Martirosyan. And this second session, just because there was the last session, there were a few questions, and so there were some important points that Hrach wasn't able to get to about connections with Urartian and Iranian. So he's going to start with that, but there's also an organic connection. It makes sense to start with Urartian and Iranian before moving on to the written period. But to make sure we have enough time, I'll just hand it over.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, we just go on to the next, having discussed already the Anatolian borrowings into Armenian. Now we come to a relatively younger period. And now we are dealing with Armenian loanwords in Urartian. As I mentioned in my first lecture, so in several institutions in Europe or also in America, very often the history of Armenian language, or even largely spoken about Armenians, usually is started after the fall of Urartu, which is very wrong because we have certain evidence for Armenian presence of Armenian language in the context of Armenian plateau in Urartian period, and also we have been discussing some other issues which can prove or at least help us to argue about earlier presence of Armenians and Armenian language in the context of Armenian Highlands. So first, let's have a look at some examples of native Armenian words which have been borrowed into Urartian. We do have some words which Armenian borrowed from Urartian. This is true, of course, but as in the case of, for example, Georgian, we have borrowings from for both directions. There are really many Georgian borrowings into Armenian, and also vice versa. And also we have seen very important, very ancient stage of Kartvelian borrowings from Armenian. Remember probably Hun, Guinea, and some others. And this is very important to assess the all these lingo cultural layers of Armenia. Now, Urartian again. Urartian gave some words to Armenian, but we have also the other way around, which means that Urartian in the Urartian period, Armenian-speaking ethnic unit was present already in the Armenian plateau, and even before this period. But now we concentrate ourselves on the borrowings. You see the word which I already mentioned, the word for eagle, artsvi, which is borrowed into Urartian RTV. Very often, scholars suggest that Armenian artsvi is Urartian borrowing, which cannot be accepted because, as I tried to demonstrate the first time, and also I have written considerably, and also other scholars have written about this, we don't have any reason to treat Armenian artsvi as a foreign element, because phonologically and also paradigmatically. Why paradigmatically? Because it has certain firm connections also with the word for kite, that is seen, and both artsvi and seen language, a group of words, both of them have the same dialectal area. That is to say, they are present in Armenian, Greek, and Indo-Iranian. Both words, both artsvi and seen. And as I tried to demonstrate, artsvi and this Sergipio word was the epithet of seen, that is Sino word. So these both words are contextually related to each other, and also phonologically, both of them are certainly native Armenian, because we see the purely native Armenian phonological developments. So also before our pause, we have been discussing these palato-villars. You see here, I hope you can see now, my cursor shows this, the phoneme G with arch on top of it. This means that we are dealing with palato-villar, that is palatalized G sound, which regularly gives Ts in Armenian, J in Sanskrit, Z in Iranian, etc. And exactly the same we are going to see in a couple of minutes when discussing Iranian borrowings in Armenia. So please keep this in mind to see yet another evidence that phonological rules are really reliable and consequent and also regular. So Artsvi is a native Armenian word, and this means that Urartian Artsivi is borrowed from Armenian and not the other way around. Another such important word is Armenian Avel. We have two words of this shape, Avel, having different meanings. One is to increase, etc., and the other is to clean with broom. Yes, to broom. And Greek Ophello has exactly the same double representation. So I presented the material really very short here, but this is largely known etymology. You can find greater detail in my 2013 paper, The Place of Armenian in Indo-European Language Family, and it is also in my Academia Edu paper page on the site Academia Edu. And also Charles de Lamberterie wrote a large paper about this and other such Armeno-Greek isoglossies. And you can find references in my paper. So this is a really particularly important case because of this double representation of this semantic two directions. So, and both of them are present in Armenian and in Greek. And also intervocalic voiced aspirated th becomes v in Armenian regularly. So this is beyond any discussion. One very important example is, you remember from the first lecture that Indo-European instrumental ending, b, it can be either v or v if we are dealing with a vocalic stem, right? So when we say instrumental of Gorts, because Gorts is an O vocalic stem, then instrumental is Gortsov, right? Third is an E stem, then instrumental is third E V. But if we don't have these vocalic stems, but rather we have a consonant stem, like duster and genitive tester, and instrumental is not dusterov or something, because it's not a vocalic stem, but duster b. So it's not after a vowel, and for this reason, b is directly reflecting Indo-European bhi, instrumental marker, right? Eyes and instrumental is harb, classical Armenian grammar, right? Maish, marb. Ուրախություն, ուրախությանբ, ձուկն, ձկամբ, դուստր, դստերբ, etc. So whenever we have vowel and then this instrumental marker, then between vowels, this bh becomes v. This is totally regular. But after resonant, it is not a vowel, then ձկամb, harp, etc. It directly shows its original b stop form. So intervocalic bh becomes v regularly, and Indo-European bel became Armenian avel and Greek opello, right? And Urartian avili, to join in Greece, it is borrowed from Armenian, and not the other way around. Because Armenian has Greek, it's not a Greek borrowing. Phonologically, we see clearly that both are vowels, these homonyms, but actually they have one origin. So this have native Armenian phonological reflections, and this means that it's older than Urartian period. It's a native inherited item, and for this reason, Urartian should be treated as an Armenian borrowing, not the other way around. Next, we have this Tsov. Also, I presented material here, and then we discussed the word for bridge before the pause in greater detail. Why cannot I? We should go to the. Okay, thanks. The list is larger, of course, but I just to save our time, just mention some of them. You can see very important one. Because why more important? Because words are easy to borrow, but morphological things imply much deeper connections in the relationship. There are much more serious things. So Urartian me is related to Armenian prohibitive particle mi. Urartian me is also prohibitive. And Armenian particle mi, so mi gresh, mi beresh, mi siresh, mi boranaj, etc. This is a native Armenian morpheme, which is impeccable Indo-European origin. So Indo-European meh, Sanskrit ma, again, you remember that all these basic vowels, e, a, o, become a in Indo-Iranian, right? But not in Armenian, not in Greek. So we have Armenian mi, Sanskrit ma, Avestan ma, Greek me, Albanian mo, Bulgarian ma, and so we have a firm morpheme of Indo-European origin. And Urartian reflects this native Armenian particle. Then we have the conjunction ea, which scholars usually interpret as possibly maintaining this evi pronunciation, the older nature, and this Armenian yev conjunction and meaning and also. It is certainly of native Armenian origin from Indo-European epi. Again, intervocalic p becomes w in Armenian, right? Bh and p, they be like also we remember septem, the word for seven, giving in Armenian yevten. In all this classical golden Armenian form is yevten. Later, secondarily, it became yavten, then yoten, right? But all this form is yevten, which is directly reflecting Indo-European septem. Okay, very important thing is this toponymical information, like Tuvaratsini Ubi, place name, which is where we later find from Armenian sources Tuvarats a tap. Tap is something like valley, land, Ubi, more or less the same, and the basis is the word Tuvarats, which is a native Armenian composite of native Armenian components. Tuvar, which is cattle, and ats is to drive, native Armenian verb. Tuvarats. And if we find in uniform sources, Urartian sources, such a toponym, Tuvarats in a very transparent Armenian name, then, and which has native Armenian origin, then, of course, it's beyond any doubt that this place name was present here before coming of Urartians, right? So this is very important. Then I mentioned here at uni as probable place where these Armenophone confederations or ethnic units would have been living, especially as reflected in Armen Petrosyan's many works. And also here we have Diutsini, the place name. Then I let's move on to save our time. And you see here, I am showing the province Turuberan, right? So this green one, Turuberan. And Tvaratsatab is a region in this province, in Turuberan. And here we find, as I mentioned, Tvarats ini Hubi, which is Tvaratsatab. So this is a very strong case. A remarkable example is Armenian word for village, Gyuh. Here you can see a curious yet very funny paradigm of this word, which is not understandable from the logic of classical Armenian. So we don't have such a pattern. As I mentioned earlier, usually we find predictable patterns like O stem, EA stem, E stem. So we have a word, then we have this vocalic stem, addition, etc. And sometimes we also have internal, like to start the verb, when this inflectional vowel comes between. So it's inserted, to stir and to stir, right? But all these patterns are understandable from classical Armenian point of view, but not those which I mentioned previously, and also not here. You see, because we see E stem, which I marked with red color, like Gyuriv, Gyuritz or Geritz, etc., as if we are dealing with a classical Armenian word of E, that is I, declension. But look at the genitive, please. Instead of Gyuri, we have Gerj, a crazy thing which cannot be explained in normal Orthodox classical Armenian terms. There is no way to explain, to understand this, if we do not refer to the earlier, to Indo-European sources of Armenian language. Because this is another nice bridge between the issues which we have been discussing previously. We already know that after a resonant, Y becomes J. So this is another wonderful case, because in Indo-European, genitive was formed with os, not with o stems, but the other cases, like you also remember pater, genitive was pater os, right? And Armenian pater gives hair, and pater os, avr, because thra becomes ovra, also regularly. Like arodron became arosh, araver, this implement to cultivate the soil. Yeah. So mater becomes mair, but when tra are together, matros becomes mavr, more. Yeah, more is genitive of more. And the os is the final unaccented in Armenian syllable, which is lost. This is also very typical of Armenian. In ancient layers of Armenian, accent was on penultimate position. So the second from the end, not on the last syllable. Now it is on the last mainly, but earlier it was penultimate. So for this reason, genitive matros became mavr, and the last unaccented is lost. It is called apocopy, and it is impeccable. It is very well known, and okay, no discussion about this. But genitive is has been velios, right? Again, os drops, but then we are left with vely, which comes gerj. So you can see that this j is etymologically the same as this red e in these oblique cases. Yuritz, instrumental yuriv, geriv, yuritz, etc., etc. So amazing example when synchronically inexplicable paradigm becomes lucid and wonderful if we are talking about Proto-Armenian layers. And this ingenious scenario has been independently made by two very important Armenologists, Klingenschmidt and Rasmussen. So it's interesting. So it's independently the same scenario, and so this also shows that we are dealing with a serious thing, which two different scholars working independently can come to the same conclusion. And also the etymology concerns this in the European term, stem, velio, genitive, giving, gerch, etc. So, and etymologically it means assembly of people, crowd, and then it became village. And you see here a clear example for this semantic shift, when a word meaning crowd can little bit shift its meaning to multitude of people representing village, so village population, right? Like we see Sanskrit grammar and Slavic forms, gromada, etc. So meaning military host, village, village community, etc. Or Kurdish gund, which means village, versus Persian gund, crowd, army. So this is why is this word important for us? Because this shows that the older form of gyur was ger, and gyur v is secondary, and all these paradigms really very ancient, very interesting. And I'm not discussing this the issue of v. It takes us too far, but it's the references can be found in the dictionary and elsewhere. But this new interpretation of mine shows that Urartian valley, which means crowd or army, can easily be treated as borrowing from not classical Armenian period gyur, but from older form of this same Armenian form. Like we treated the word for wine, Guinea, and Kartvelian borrowed it not in 5th century, but 2000 years before that, and in the form vino. So phonologically, it can be shown very interestingly. So this etymology has been suggested by Hapansyan, but has been forgotten because gyur, and meaning village, and the Urartian word is valley, meaning crowd, army. Okay, both semantically, formally, therefore. But so if we go deeper into analysis, we see that in Urartian period, we indeed would not have yet gyur, but valley, and the v is intrusion for the nominative. So again, I leave aside all the details, but this is a wonderful case when forgotten etymology brought to new, fresh light with new strict linguistic methods. But then old etymologies can be revived and become even much more strength. Okay, only a couple of, so this is a huge issue, but for us, for this series of lectures, only methodological basis is really of significance. Why we think that a certain Armenian word is borrowed from Iranian to Armenian, not the other way around, a question which people and even scholars keep asking and sometimes being very angry. So, for example, these words are present in Armenian and in Persian. Why you keep saying that Armenian borrowed, not they borrowed from? So this is, of course, not a scientific formulation of the problem. The thing is that we have linguistic means for analysis, and we treat phonological developments, and we can clearly show that a certain word developed into this direction, not the other way around. And a couple of very lucid examples will show what I mean. So I already mentioned that the Iranian element is the largest layer of the Armenian borrowed lexicon. Of course, native Armenian is more much more important because it concerns basic parts of vocabulary, most important parts of vocabulary, although in some extent also Iranian is significant as far as semantic domains are concerned. But much more important is that native Armenian are also morphemes, that is morphological skeleton of Armenian. So we don't have borrowed morphemes in Armenian. We do have some suffixes borrowed from Iranian or others, but suffixes are okay. But case endings or verbal personal endings or these kind of things, all of them are native Armenian. So borrowings, mostly the semantic pattern, words, simply words, and some syntactic features, these can be borrowed or culled or give some influence, but the things are much more important and conservative. So for this reason, the most important layers of Armenian is native part, and then from borrowings, Iranian. Okay, now Heinrich Hirschman has shown that Armenian is an independent branch of Indo-European. It's previously it has been thought that Armenian is an Iranian language, so it belonged to Iranian branch of Indo-European. But Hirschman proved that Armenian continues Indo-European roots according to its own phonological developments. And next to this, we have words which are found also in Iranian, but they look much more similar to Iranian, and they don't reflect these old Armenian phonological roots. So this means that they are borrowed from Iranian, right? We keep in mind that Armenian and Iranian both are Indo-European branches, right? Indo-European languages. So that exactly like we discussed with the Anatolian, if we have two cognate languages, here Armenian and Iranian group of languages, both are Indo-European, then their linguistic relationship can be twofold again. One share would be inherited parts, so Indo-European common roots, which are reflected in both branches. And here there are no loan words. I mean, Armenian May and Persian Madar, or Armenian Duster and Persian Dohtar, they are not borrowed from one another, but they are cognates coming from the common Indo-European mother source, right? But next to this, we have the name Dohtar in Armenian, and it is certainly because Duster is according to phonological development of native Armenian system. It's the native form, and Maid is also the native, but Dohtar is certainly Iranian, and it is borrowed from Iranian. So now, very lucid examples. Please pay attention here. Here we have Indo-European word for cow or ox or bull, gvov. This is a reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European word for this bovine animal. And we discuss certain things related to this previously, right? So native Armenian word for this is kov. You see, g becomes voiceless, k regularly, and o remains intact. Both are regular for Armenian. Kov. But next to this in Armenian we have gavazan, which means stick for driving the cow. Gavazan, right? So this is the same Indo-European root, but reflected in two forms. One is native Armenian kov, and the other is gav, because you see here, please, Sanskrit gav, Middle Persian gav. So these are native Indo-Iranian reflexes of the same Indo-European word gov, because they don't have this devoicing shift g. Armenian does, and Germanic, by the way, also. That's why we have cow or ku in English, in Dutch, in German, etc. So not voiced, but k. So Germanic and Armenian had this devoicing shift. But Sanskrit and Iranian have kav, right? The other component, ag, again with palatovelar, which gives in Armenian ts. You remember in the previous lecture we have been discussing this, and this gives Armenian ts exactly like in Artsvi. Then we had Artsvi, eagle, Rjipya in Sanskrit, and Arzifya in Iranian. So ts, j, z. Look perfectly here. So I could bring tens of such examples, dozens of such examples, and everywhere these phonological rules are kept. So like there we have Artsvi, Rjipya, and Arzifya, exactly the same way. Here we, from Indo-European ats, to bring this verbal stem, we have Armenian atsel, atsem, Sanskrit ajati, and Avestan azaidi. Again, ts, j, z. Every language has its own phonological trajectory, right? And the word for both, nav, which is indifferent. I mean, both native and borrowed forms would be nav. And so keep in mind, please, this also in front of your eyes, these three lexemes, gov, ag, and nav. And have a look, please, here, Armenian gavazan. It is composed of this first word, go, bull or cow, and the second verb, ag, with palatovelar ge, which gives Armenian ts. So, cow leader, a stick with which we lead or drive cattle, right? So, if this compound would be Armenian, native Armenian, then could you guess, please, what would be the native form? Kovats. We don't have it, right? Kovats. We have Tvarats, which means the one who drives cattle, right? But for this stick word, Kovats, we don't have that. Instead, we see Gav Azan, and we can see in the same compound. So it's not only reconstructible, but it is certainly present in both Indic and Iranian languages. Gav Azza is the same thing, and in Sanskrit, so we see also the nasal suffix, go ajana, whip, stick for driving cattle. So next to this go ajana, Gav Azana, from Middle Iranian source, Armenian borrowed Gav Azan. And on the bottom, you see Navaz, so boat driver, right? Navaz, again, from Nav, and the second ag to bring, lead, is verb, Navaz. And it is certain that Navaz is borrowed from Parthian Navaz, because Parthian Navaz reflects Iranian regular sound laws. Native Armenian term would be Navaz, right? But it is Navaz, so we stop the discussion. So it's an Iranian loanword, whether we like it or not. But of course, there is nothing here to like or dislike. We are dealing with science and with scientific methods. We have seen that more considerable part of Armenian is native, directly inherited from Indo-European, but the borrowings are present in any language. So it's not an issue related to patriotism or some, but which sadly is present a lot in Armenian discourses. Here you can see a table where I presented all these developments of these palatals, right? So k, palatal comes in Armenian and others, and the second is, the third is z, etc. Okay, again, we don't lose them. What I explained, now you can see in one nice table. So all these elements are regular. They are represented in native forms in all these cognate languages. But again, this Kavazan and Navaz are compounds of these same roots, and they are. Here's more examples. Again, we don't lose much time, but only let's have a look on this one, and then we move on. Ped or pod, this is the word for food. And again, we again and again, we come across to the same already very nicely transparent for us phonological rules. So we said that because in Armenian, but in Germanic languages, right? So ped and pod, het and vot is Armenian word for food, and trace, the footstep, foot trace, etc. It comes from Indo-European ped and pud, and this is very certain. And in Parthian, which is an Iranian language, which have been a lot in contact with Armenian, this E, O, both become A. We already know this rule, right? E, A, O, all merge into one A. And intervocalic the in Parthian becomes the. So it's not anymore a stop, but it is a spirant. It has been assimilated. It's the, right? So is this the in all such cases from Parthian the, we have Armenian borrowings with r, like fra pa zaka becomes ra pa rak, for example. Like both becomes buj, and many dozens of such examples. So again, this is not open for discussion. The intervocalically becomes the in Parthian, and in Armenian it is r. So we have Armenian het and vot, but next to this we have some words with par, which means foot, in borrowings, like herapar, heel, or karshapar, thigh for foot, etc. So par is the same Indo-European word, which is reflected in het and vot as native reflex, but through Iranian intermediation as par, according to Iranian phonology. Okay, then I almost stop here. The rest is just some bibliography, some important items for this study. But the final and very important page here is that sometimes we even have an Iranian borrowing when we don't have any single Iranian remnant of the word. So this can seem strange, but we really have such cases because words can be lost throughout the development of certain language. They can be replaced by other words. They can be forgotten. We can remember hundreds of examples in any language for any stage. Like we have many words which were very present and reliably attested in 18th or 19th century Armenian, but now no one remembers about this. We have classical 5th century wonderful words of native Indo-European origin, but which are totally forgotten now. But only through books we know about this, and also through dictionaries. So words can be lost or replaced, right? And Armenian is very important to reconstruct not only Indo-European items, but also Iranian lost words. Please have a look here. In Sanskrit, we have on bottom here, we have a word, nidra, which means sleepiness, slumber, nidra. And in Armenian, we have word meaning the same thing, nish. Semantically, they are the same, and formally, they look very much like each other, right? But nish cannot be explained as a native Armenian word, because in that case, we would have nitr, and then according to Armenian laws, would be metathesized. So nirt. If we would have an Armenian word nirt, then this would be a perfect native match for nidra, but we don't. Instead, we have nish, which shouts that I am an Iranian borrowing. Really, rh is certainly Iranian borrowing. So we keep in mind that Indic and Iranian branches are one. That they are sub branches of one major branch. right? From Indo-European, we have the dialectal group Armenian, Greek, and Indo-Iranian. This is otherwise called also Aryan. And then this Indo-Iranian or Aryan branch was later split to two sub-branches, so Indic and Iranian. So Indic and Iranian are really very, very close to each other. Sometimes people even reconstruct poetic formulae or even syntagmatic almost sentences which are found in Avesta, in the holy book of Zoroastrians, and Rigveda. So even these phrases and syntactic units can be reconstructed so close they are, right? So next to Vedic Nidra, it is easily imaginable that there was an Iranian Nidra. And Parthian reflex of this Nidra must have been Nish, which is indeed what we find in Armenia. So not a single Iranian language has preserved this word, but phonological interpretation and the help of Sanskrit Nidra show clearly that we are dealing with an Iranian word. So Armenian helps in this and many, many such cases. Sometimes Iranian stems are preserved and they are attested, for example, in Eastern Iranian languages like Khwarezmian, Bactrian, or Avestan, the ancient, most ancient Iranian language. But these languages have never been in contact with Armenian. But Parthian and Middle Persian, and also it's difficult to handle this Median language, they have been in contact with Armenian, but not the other ones. But sometimes we have a form which is absent from Parthian or Middle Persian, but it is present in other Iranian languages. So in this way of this triangle, we understand that these words have been present also in Parthian and Armenian, preserved there from the total loss. Okay, then, so this is the end of the what we had before, and this is an organic link to the other issue, because after the influence of Iranian started with the Arshakuni period. After this period, we come closer to the 5th century, which is the locus of our written culture. And at this point, we smoothly pass to the other issue of our. If there are no questions so far, then can we continue? Okay. Now we are talking about Armenian, the origin and nature of Armenian alphabet and writing system. Then a couple of words about periodization of classical Armenian and Middle Armenian. Concerning the last issues, we won't have much linguistic material because it is much easier to discuss them in the last lecture when we will be dealing with dialects. So then it will be clear why. So, okay, now a brief periodization of written Armenian. First, we have classical or grapar, classical Armenian or so-called grapar. Etymologically, it is written. It means written language, and it starts with 5th century and it develops to 11th century, and Nagorno-Karabakh is usually treated as the last classical Armenian according to this chronological. Of course, we should keep in mind that scholars, historians and the ancient authors continued to write in grapar also after this period when Middle Armenian has already started. So this is something different. I mean, grapar was a classical language, a written language, and many authors continue using it even until 19th century, when this famous grapaikar, or this struggle of script or written culture, right? And also there is yet another very important issue which we should bear in mind. always that any language, as we said repeatedly, any living language always develops and changes, always. But classical or written language can stay intact, so unchanged, because there is a scholarly tradition, there is a written school, a school of writing culture, and it is taught from generation to another generation of pupils, and it goes on, and it remains without any significant changes. During centuries, it can, depending on the century or the author, it can have some stylistic differences, nuances, etc. But largely spoken, it's the same classical written language tradition, grammar. So basically, it is the same grammatical system when we compare 5th century and 18th or 19th century grammar, because they are scholars, they know the classical language and they continue using it as, like Latin has been developed as a living language to Romanic languages, right? Like Italian, French, Portuguese, and others. But next to this, we see that Latin continued as a state, but only scholarly language or classical language is continues to be used much more recently. Even now, there are people who write letters to each other, especially scholars, in Latin. Right? But as a living language, it is dead since long. And the same way, grammar is not dead, of course, because it's the same Armenian language, but it's direct, continuous, is Middle Armenian in its various representations, and modern Armenians, and also modern dialects, but they descend not directly from grammar, because grammar is not the real living language, but it is the canonical, it is the written and canonically processed form of the 5th century really existent language. So this is this can be a bit confusing, but of course people always ask this question. Then I really want to make clear my point of view. So in the 5th century, we had living Armenian language with certain dialectal differences depending on the region, right? Especially in such a mountainous land as Armenia is, we cannot imagine one unique language which is the same everywhere in Tzok, in Artsakh, in Korduk, or in Gugark. So it's not imaginable, right? But we don't have direct evidence to search these dialectal differences. But we know that Mesrop Martos and his school has taken a central or a bit northern Ararat or Truberan part of spoken, really existent form of Armenian, and they made it's canonical. They didn't, of course, invent morphological forms, or that they didn't create language or linguistic forms, but they just made the canons when, for example, when they have parallel forms, then they say that, okay, we use this form. So they started to create a school of written tradition, and they took colloquial living form of Armenian of the certain area, and they turned it to a written language. But next to this, the living language in that and in neighboring in all the other areas continued to develop and change. This is why in the 10th century, in the time of Grigor Naregasi, when thereafter the Cilician kingdom started its existence, then people realized that, okay, so it's not very cogent to continue using Grapar as a state language of Cilicia, because during these 5 or 6 or 7 centuries, the real colloquial language, the real living language, was changed considerably. In the 5th century, it is almost the same language. So only it was a living colloquial language, and Mesrop, Martirosyan, and the others made it canonical, right? So they worked on it a little bit. But then 6 or 7 centuries later, people realized that also this, of course, that they would have seen that also earlier. So it didn't happen with a jump. Centuries from century to another century, this change becomes more and more significant. And in the time of Middle Armenian period, in the Cilician Kingdom period, it was already very, very apparent, very obvious that Middle Armenian is already very different from Classical. So they made a new literary language tradition, Middle Armenian. But again, next to this, many authors continue writing Grapar. But Grapar was dead already centuries before that, right? So this is an important thing. So we have written tradition and we have living spoken colloquial tradition, and so that they can deviate from each other, because the other one, the living tradition, never stops. So it is independent. The people communicate. If we are talking about not artificial language, but about real languages, then the development is ongoing. So it never stops and it always changes. Written culture can stay. Okay, we have here classical or Grapar period from 5th century to 11th centuries. And 5th century, most part of it is considered as Boskedarian golden age period, mostly to 460, right? But there are many scholars who think this is just a traditional thing, because there is no clear-cut separation between these two periods. But okay, so this is not relevant for our discussion. Then we go on. So you all know, of course, that Mesrop Martirosyan invented the Armenian alphabet in the beginning of 5th century, in 405 or 6. Then the Armenian alphabet had 36 original letters, and O and F have been added later, so in the 11th and 12th centuries. And one would wonder why. Because in the 5th century, Armenians did not have the phoneme F. If, for example, there was a word for glory, far, in Parthian, it is borrowed into Armenian as par. Of course, K is the plural marker, and in Parthian it was F. It is the well-known Iranian Khvarna lexeme, important also for mythology, right? Because it was a luminous glory, and there are a lot of mythic traditions related to it. But as a word, it has the meaning of glory, Khvarna, and in some of the Iranian forms, we have Farna, and the Rna becomes R. In Parthian, we have Far, normally attested form, and from this we have Par. Classical Armenian did not have phoneme F. So we had V, this aspirant voiced V, but its voiceless match was absent. So we didn't have F. Then centuries later, when from some developments, or also from borrowings from Latin or other languages, there appears a need to reflect also this phoneme. And then starting from the Middle Armenian period, they introduced also the letter F to reflect this. And why O was absent? Because O is originally a diphthong. We have seen, and also we are going to see in a couple of minutes again, this, for example, Mastara inscription of 7th century, where we read Yerbaver. For this, just one example. So in many ancient manuscripts also we find without O, so the original form, Yerbaver or Mavers or Karaft instead of Karot, etc. So unlike the other, the Vo, which is a monophthong, this O is historically an old diphthong. So Yerbor with round O, it was in the 5th century, 6th, 7th, 8th, etc. It was Yerbaver. So in the 5th century, it was not pronounced yet Yerbor, but Yerbaver. Like if we now say we Urahutun, or we say Lois, and everything was pronounced as in the 5th, it is spelled in the 5th century. Otherwise, his school would not do this ways of transliteration, right? So O is originally a diphthong, and F is a new sound. That's why they have been absent in the original alphabet, and those letters have been introduced. The earliest script is called Yerbatagir, so literally iron letters, iron script. There are many interpretations why we call this this way, and there is literature about this. Okay, but then we move on. So we don't have any firm evidence for pre-Martirosyan or pre-Mesropian written system. There are some indirect evidence. There is some indirect evidence, but we don't have really readable text written in Armenian prior to this. We do have texts, but not written. I mean, Mesrop Martirosyan has evidenced wonderful epic fragments, like Birth of Wagner, the god, or wonderful fragments from this epic Artavast, Artaxes, and Satanik. And also Grigor Magistros recorded much later, but still very ancient, wonderful fragment of the dream of Artaxes, Votairins, Zuchtschani, etc. But these are the very valuable, very important pre-Christian and pre-Golden Age fragments, texts, but we don't have written evidence from them. So they have been orally transmitted. Mr. Martirosyan says that he listened to these songs performed in Gorten, Gavar, in the province of Gorten, now in Nakhichevan region, of course, very tragically in the territory of Azerbaijan. So a wonderful, epic, and ancient tradition. So this is what we have, and Moses Khoronatsi is the one who recorded these wonderful fragments. And we call, by the way, Kertorahaish, father of rhetoricians or grammarians. This is a figure which shows the whole development of Armenian language, including all the possible stages. So I briefly represent this also in the first lecture, but now you can see my cursor shows here, which is the year of birth of Christ. So this is the beginning of our era, right? And this is the first millennium. And in the middle, in the 5th century, we have beginning of our written documented history, Grabhar, Michin Hayren, and Ashkarabar. And there are Hayalezu and Mesropatar. So with yellow color, I marked this period. Before that, we also have some documents about the Armenians, but not in Armenian. Unfortunately, we don't have any text in Armenian prior to Mr. Martos. Again, we have some hypotheses, but real evidence, real textual material is missing. There are some attempts, for example, to interpret hieroglyphic Urartian as written on the basis of Armenian. Some of them are interesting, like Martirosyan wrote, for instance, in Aramazd paper, but this concerns a very small piece of fragment. Armenian presence was there, of course, in the Urartian period, so this can be accepted. But this doesn't mean that Urartian as a language is Armenian. And the other thing is that much more widespread are non-scientific ways of interpreting this hieroglyphic Urartian. For example, Hrach Karagözyan used a non-acceptable methodology of interpreting this script, this hieroglyphic Urartian, and I wrote a paper about this, and also this can be found on Academia Edu on my page. Okay, so here we can see that starting from mid-first millennium before Common Era, we have directly attested foreign language sources. Like we can remember here, of course, famous inscription of Darius, the old Persian king. So 6th, 5th centuries, the Greek and Persian authors, and also Xenophon, right, 5th century, Anabasis, and Cyropedia, and Herodotus, and many other historians. So we have a lot of evidence also from non-Armenian sources. Before the ancient Iranian period, we have Urartu, and we already saw that also in the Urartian time, although there is no direct evidence saying that Armenians, speakers of this language, bearers of this language, have been lived here. We don't have such a direct document, but linguistic material, some of a very small portion of which I tried to demonstrate. It shows very clearly that it is very wrong to assume that Armenians came into Armenian Highlands after the fall of Urartu. Then we have Hayasa. We have been also discussing this in the section concerning linguistic relationship between Armenian and Anatolians. And this is the end of the early historical period. Then we have dark period, not elucidated in any document. And this darkest period we can study only by means of comparative historical linguistics. So we can reconstruct the language, and also because reconstruction of vocabulary also implies reconstruction of proto-culture, right? Because a language is the only systematic means of having reflected semantic domains of any language. I mean, if we are talking about craft or rug making or animal husbandry or wood making or any field, if we study any field or religion or rituals or just anything, then we can have some sporadic evidence from archaeological excavations or from ethnographic records, but these are much younger, of course. And much of the evidence which comes from earlier, more ancient stages are absent in ethnographic and archaeologic or other disciplines. And historical linguistics is the only sphere where we can, with the help of which we can reconstruct all those systems, because language is a system. If we are dealing with semantic domain, for example, craft, pestle, rug, or spoon, or axe or whatever, then all of them have designations, right? Their denotata have not been preserved, right? So 5,000, 6,000 years, sometimes archaeological remains can be found, but not very often, not systematically, not concerning the oldest periods, but linguistic material is there. I mean, if we have any idea, any notion, then it has a linguistic designation, and studying this, we can study its origin, its root, and the other extra linguistic information. Okay, so these early stages of Proto-Armenian are dark in the sense that they are not presented by direct documents, historical documents. But historical linguistics helps to reconstruct the whole picture of the development of Armenian language and culture. And here, this black stage is the proto-language period. Starting from this proto-language community is dispersed and gradually, and first we can discern dialectal differences, Hay, Hun, and Diranakan, that is Armenian, Greek, and Indo-Iranian. This is early dialectal split, and then we go gradually to the early historical records. And this green is, of course, the absolute chronology, 5th millennium, 4th millennium, 3rd, etc., etc. Okay, then we move on to the alphabet. Here we can see the classical Armenian alphabet consisting of 36 letters. Again, we don't see here F, and also we don't see here O, which were absent. The phonemes were yet absent. And we can, from this, we can see that from the very early stages, these letters have been used as numerals, like A, B, G, D, Y, Z, E, T. So these are the numerals from 1 to 9. Then starting from J, we have tens, 10, J, then E is 20, L is 30, etc. And K, hundreds, and R, thousands. So when someone wants to write that there have been soldiers, this means 2,222 soldiers, right? So the Arabic ciphers come, of course, later. But if we are dealing with the date, then we will add 551 because the Armenian this calendaric system started from that year 551. So then, if a certain church is founded, say in the year of Hrach, that is 1111, then it is founded plus 551 years. And it is very important to remember that Armenian alphabet is original as far as the shapes of characters are concerned, but it of course has its prototype in ancient Greek, and this is conceivable because ancient Greek is the source of early Christian, many other cultures. I mean, the written systems and also all these translated texts usually come from Greek, and this is also the case of Armenians. Mesrop Mashtots invented alphabet in order to make possible to transmit Christianity by ways of written culture, to be able to translate the Bible, to perform a liturgy and Christian rituals, etc. And also the prototype was Greek because we see the Greek sequence of letters. So here you can see this red color Greek correspondences of Armenian letters. Sometimes we have here no correspondences here because Greek phonemic system was poorer than the Armenian one, and there are many phonemes, especially affricates and or some other phonemes do not have their Greek matches, and Mesrop Mashtots had to invent also letters for these missing phonemes, and then he introduced them between the others. We are not sure according to which principle he did this. It's interesting that in Georgian we have a different picture. In Georgian also there are many endemic phonemes which have been absent from Greek alphabet. But in Georgian case, all these strange letters are at the end. So they are gathered at the end of the alphabet. But here we have insertion of certain missing characters at certain places. And we don't have real evidence this letter is here. And there are, of course, a lot of ideas, studies, but not very convincing it's present. Okay, so, important things concerning certain non-scientific issues which are very, very much widespread. And that's why I think it's worth to treat, because even in universities, there are very often such discussions, and even the professors claim these issues, and also these kind of things can be found even in academic, in the school program, like in Armenian literature by David Gasparian. I have written on Facebook about this. He developed very strange ideas in the handbook. So this is, I'm sorry to say, but this is a shame. So it's okay to write this on a personal Facebook page or whenever. But if it is written on in a handbook, then this is a disaster. So he developed a very funny idea, according to which the letter G is in the first and the third place, because G is a divine cipher. This and it's the first letter of Greek language. Yeah. And many others such. So I can give reference if necessary. But next to this, we have even more strange and very fixed ideas. For example, that E is holy letter and holy phoneme. E because Euchun, etc. And because of this, E is in the seventh position. So because 7 is also divine cipher. And this is nonsense, because this essence, Euchun, E was the normal Indo-European root. S later appeared, and the third person is MS, third is E, and also E has become nucleus for later constructions like Euchun, etc., etc. Right? So, like in other languages, also like essentia, Latin. So it is also based on the same Indo-European verb to be. S disappears normally in Armenian. So this holy E in 5th century, it would be E or S 1,000 years before Mesrop Martos. But then what happened? So it's not divine anymore. So and also now this third person becomes A in colloquial language. This is a matter of another very strong battle, discussion. This A is it's very soft to say profane. So it's pichts. So there are doctors of sciences which says that this A or Jandak by is pichts, abominable, or so disgusting, or whatever. Now this is really a non-scientific approach, and I find this totally unacceptable. The only thing which we can say is that this A is not accepted in literally standard language. And that's it. But it's a normal living language form in many dialects, not only this Ararat or Lori, or many, even some Western dialects. I wrote also about this considerably. It's a normal linguistic feature, and one should treat this without such emotions. And also another curious thing, we have this negative particle next to A, we have che or chi, depending on the syntactic position, right? And very often you can find such a view from very learned people. They said that chi, for example, sa inspect chi. This is a very, very blameful, a very disgusting way of speaking. You should say che, not chi. So putting aside the thing that chi is found in many living dialects, and dialects also deserve respect, right, and investigation and normal sound attitude. But leaving this aside, we should bear in mind that this che is already chi in another pattern. For example, na chi galis, right? We cannot say na che galis. So here, even the canon of the modern language says that in this case, che is chi. So what happened? So this is not sacral anymore. So what is the point of this discussion? So they, it's very funny and very sad that even such learned people sometimes give such an argumentation. Chi is unacceptable. Sorry, chi is unacceptable because it offends this pure holy Armenian A. So A should stay intact, right? So this is, of course, we laugh, but this is really very tragic because such theories are encountered also in academic or in universities in discussions by professors with students, and also not speaking about Facebook and other social media. It's overflowed by such pseudoscientific things. But this is very simple. A is in the seventh position because it corresponds to Greek eta. And this is the end of the story. This is the end of the holy story, right? The whole holy story. This doesn't mean that Armenian language is not sacred to us. We adore Armenian language, but we don't like, I personally, I hate any lies or any pseudoscientific things around Armenian. Because Armenian is wonderful, Armenian alphabet, Armenian culture are absolutely valuable and wonderful without all these pseudoscientific things. And these are just shame, and we should keep separate ourselves from these things. Okay, one of the oldest Armenian inscriptions, Ekor, unfortunately now in the territory of Turkey, and the other tributary of Araxes, Ahurian, Tekor 5th century. And we cannot find this anymore. You understand that it's not yet existent, but we are happy to see all photos of pictures of this. So there are some fragments. Then we have, very briefly, we saw some such examples, right, in the introductory mosaic from Jerusalem, 5th century, 6th century, sorry. And we can see that both these and these are Yerkatagir. So Yerkatagir had only capital, so it's the Unchal script, and it has only capitals. This is a photo by my nice colleague Hamlet Petrosyan, and this is the text. Okay, and this is the inscription from Mastara, 7th century, which I showed you also earlier. And I was talking about the central part of this inscription. You still remember, huh? Yerbaver. So this is Ye, Re, Be, A, and B. This is W, and then R. I mean Vyun, right? And then here we see the Yerbaver. So this is written here. The rest of the inscription is not our direct concern. So this is this description on the wall of this church in Mastara. And so then we see some other manifestations of this capital, the Serkatagir script, some manuscripts. Then we come to younger periods. We can see some nice illuminations also. And this is, for example, from the Bible text. This is the initial part, and you can see here some scenes from Genesis, like the birth of Eva from the rib of Adam. And so this is the beginning of Genesis. Girk Tsenendot, the translation of. So a couple of words about the pre-Christian Armenian writing system. As I stated earlier, we don't have solid evidence. We cannot deny the possibility that there were something before that, but there are certain hypotheses. So with due respect to all, some of them which are more or less scientific, but next to this there are a lot of non-scientific things, of course. But what is more probable is that, leaving aside the thing whether a literature, textual tradition is attested or not, then we can say that more probably there were at least some traditions of making some written marks, signs. We don't know whether they composed texts from them or they just used it for magic purposes or whatever. We don't have solid evidence again, but we have some attestations of such tradition. For example, Yerishe, in his remarkable passage from Mekmutun Araratsotz, he mentions Otar Khorortovk Nishanagirs Gtzel. So he mentions some actions which are not good for Christians, or unacceptable. And among them, to draw Nishanagirs, right? Written signs, to draw written signs. Otar Khorortovk, according to the alien or foreign thought. So what is exactly beyond this is difficult to assess, but there are some other indirect and interesting finds which I try to gather and to think that maybe these are some other evidence of the existence of such pre-Christian signs. Like in many regions, we have hamails, amulets, and in some regions, for example, in Basen, it says that these triangular hamails, these amulets, have been made out of birch bark, the bark of this birch tree. Whether this is an accidental resemblance or not, but one should not forget about the wonderful Indo-European tradition found in at least Slavic and Vedic traditions. In both of them, the bark of this birch tree name, Indo-European it was birch, berioza, beriosta, beresto, etc. So these written documents Peresto, Periosta, etc. It comes from this tree name. From the same tree name, Sanskrit has burja, a kind of birch, which was also used to make writing material, and it is attested in Yajurveda. So we have, this can be found, for example, in Gamkrilidze Ivanov's famous monograph, but without Armenian data. So they say, but not only they, but in this book, you can find evidence. So Sanskrit burja and Slavic peresto from the same root. It tells us about tradition of making written documents, written documents on the bark of this tree, birch bark. And we saw above here that in some Armenian regions, they also had some talismans, hemails, which are made from, again, birch bark. So it's very attractive. And whether this is a typological or one can see more beyond this, that it's really very seductive. And but of course, we need much more material in order to be more convinced in this. Okay, and there has been a lot of, I would say, battle about this discussion, whether there was pre-Christian, pre-Martirosyan written system in Armenian or not. I could, so I've written some pieces here, and also the literature can be found there. But in general, one could remember the two books. The first one by Ashot Abrahamian, who was convinced that the Armenians not only had pre-Martirosyan writing system, but also rich literature. But of course, we don't have any solid evidence. And Professor Eduard Agayan, as a reply to this book, he wrote another, the whole book about this, and severely criticizing this book. And later, there is also some other literature. The other scholars have been written about this, like Artak Movsisyan, Albert Musherian, and many others. So, and academician Levon Khachikian and many others. But of course, so we stop with this discussion here, and my conclusion is that it's an interesting and important issue to understand whether there were some traditions prior to Mashtots, but which nature did they have, etc., etc. So it can be studied. It needs to be studied, but at this moment we cannot pinpoint to a solid textual evidence for this literature or existence of writing system. Okay, at the end, a couple of words about the terms of different stages of written Armenian language. Grapar is transparently, of course, written language or book language, so Schriftsprache. And it is composed of gir, letter, writing or book, and the adverbial suffix abar. So grapar is according to the, literally, according to the writing. So in a writing manner, in a written manner, grapar. And this, in this sense, in a written manner, by way of writing, not as yet as a designation of the face of this written Armenian language. It is attested in translation from Socrates. Next to grapar, we have grabar. So instead of this adverbial suffix abar, there are bar composed with gish and bar, which is word. Gharabagh. For example, Mkhitar Sebastatsi, 1730 Roman era. Then also some other authors, but this version is also attested in some dialects, like Karabakh has Karapar. Of course, Karabakh, Artsakh area. But actually, I need to clarify one point here. Very often we hear instead of Karabaghi Barbar, Artsakhi Barbar. I am strongly in favor of using Artsakh generally about the area, and I have written many times on Facebook and other ways. And of course, we should. Artsakh is the very ancient historical native term for this area. So why Gharabagh, right? So I am in favor of eliminating Gharabagh in this general context. But historically and also dialectologically, Gharabagh should be preserved in certain contexts. For example, if we are talking about dialects, then we should keep on the tradition saying Gharabaghi Barbar, because in the territory of Artsakh, there are also other dialects which are linguistically different. Adruti Barbar, Hrach, Khatsabert, etc. And there can be some argument whether this or that is a real dialect or sub-dialect or parlor or whatever. But in general, traditionally, by Acharyan and by others, mainly in this Chushi, Stepanakert, this central veranda area, this dialect which is present in this area is traditionally called Gharabaghi, and we should stick on this tradition. And as I said, there are also other purely dialectal designations in the territory of Artsakh. But historically, geographically, of course, one should stick on the term Artsakh, and Artsakh should, I think, we shouldn't say Gharabagh unless there are some historical context which makes us use it. Okay, then we have this Hadrut, Sharach, etc., Kirapar, etc. And in Mox also Kirapar. And it's interesting that in both Artsakh and one group to which Mox belongs, intervocalically, in general, the voice series becomes voiceless per tecta. So here we see it in both Gharabagh and also Mox, but intervocalically sometimes they become aspirated. So then we have also Kirapar version. Okay, then we move to the contrast between Kirapar, written or book language, and modern Armenian Ashkharabar, which literally means wordly speech or regional language. Ashkhar is land or region, right? And also we have Ashkharik, which means secular or lay. And so this is the essence of the contrast: written language and secular or vulgar or lay language. Vulgar, of course, in the sense that we are talking about the language of shall I put the term plebeians or non-learned people, or this can be interpreted differently depending on the period. But even Grehik, which is treated as vulgar in modern way, something as negative, but of course it's not a negative originally. Gre is people, crowd, people, and so Grehik language is just colloquial, it's normal term for colloquial, non-written, but spoken, living language form. Exactly like the vulgar form of Latin, because it's from vulgus and it is people, population, right? So the same, exactly the same is Grehik, which is which consists of Gre and the word. And here we can see also the parallelism between Rapar and Ashkharabar as far as the adverbial suffix is concerned. Then, because sometimes people argue whether it is adverbial or not here, but then we see wonderful parallel form, Ashkaroren. So Ashkharabar, Ashkaroren, both are adverbial suffixes, and it is attested in the 12th century that it means secularly or vulgarly, and so it is used for context of speaking. So speaking in a secular, in a vulgar manner, not according to the written ways or decent canons or whatever, but according to the vulgar or secular or lay way. And then we also have Ramkoren, which also means vulgarly, popularly, commonly, again, an adverb. And Ramik is, of course, the peasant, farmer, etc. Ramkoren, again, with this adverbial suffix oren. Then we have also Polish-Armenian Yerkrtsnak, and it means as a typological parallel. So Yerkir is synonym of Ashkhar, and so this means Armenian language, but etymologically it is derived from Yerkir, which means land and country. So basically it means language of the land or the fatherland or this kind of things. And in Middle Armenian we find Ashkharabar. So again parallelism. So we have Gerapar, Ashkharabar, but then we have also Gerabar, and here Ashkharabar. Both constructions are there, and it would be interesting to study even deeper to find out the chronological sequences of which form is older or in which context is it attested, etc. So, for example, in Amir Dovlat Amasyatsi, 15th century, Ashkharabar is used to express the colloquial language, that is non-written, non-grammar language. Or Ashkhari Bar, so Alexianos, another late author, he uses Ashkhari Bar, which means speech or word of world, region. So all these are nice parallels, typological parallels to each other, and also they confirm the basic ideas. And in the dialect of Zeytun, Ashkhara is Ashkhari, it reflects Ashkhari with E vocalic change, and it means lay, non-religious, as opposed to Kronavor, religious. So this is a different context, but similar kind of development. And then we are almost there. So here we can see that in contrast to the written book language, Grapar, or the grammatical, Kertogagan language, so grammatical language, the colloquial or dialectal language is called according to this, the following ways. Like Gerjuk Ban, Gerjuk, literally it means peasant, farmer. Gyur is village, villager, right? Gerj, also here we can see Gerjuk, villager, and it is based on Gyur, genitive Gerj, we saw earlier in this lecture, right? Gerjka Banem, it means to speak in a not very decent or not written or not in a literary way. Matin Lezu, dark or obscure language. And this Matin, dark language is used, is spoken, is considered to be spoken by Grehik. So I was talking about this word, and Grehik means commoners, plebeians. And Hamam Aravelsi, for example, 9th century, he used this word. So Matin Lezu is spoken by Grehik. And again, etymologically, Grehik is the language of the crowd, of the village, of the street, right? Village or street language. So Orakan Khosk, common, ordinary speech of words. by Ramic commoners or plebeians. Also, so that is ordinary, not of high style. This kind of distinction. And in modern times, we see the same semantic nucleus of expressing the rural village language, like in Ararat, Geratsevar, and again based on Ger, Yuch. Geratsi means villager, right? With this belonging suffix atsi. So Geratsi Avar means to speak according to the villagers, in a villager's manner. Karin, which is Erzurum, the native Armenian designation of this area is, of course, Karin. We should refer to this area and to the dialect as Karno, of course. Geratsavari, Harbert, Ersin, Harbert, etc. Geratsanak. So this is another adverbial suffix. So to speak Geratsanak means to speak by the manner of villagers. So we see the contrast between urban society and villager society. And the first one is considered as more sophisticated, more learned, but the villagers or rural communities, they are considered as representing the non-written but spoken language. I wouldn't say jargon is something different, but dialect or colloquial language. So even today, very often they say that if in a film, in an Armenian film or serial, someone uses a or jandagbai, this the verb a, which I mentioned earlier, then they said that so this film should be thrown away. So you shouldn't. So this is a high art, and so keep this for your jargon. Yeah, right. So so this is jargon language, but this is not the case. Of course, jargon is argot is something very specific, and colloquial dialectal speech is. And you see Van, Karin, Ararat, Geravra, Sebastian, Gervra, Ararat, Mush, Geravari. So according to a villager manner, but not only for speaking. So if someone is dressed Geravari Haknevel, and it means that according to a villager manner. So again, not only speech, but also other things can be presented in this contrast, Hrach versus Yuch. It's very interesting that often we find the term Harakakan or Karakatsiakan in the term of Middle Armenian or related issues. Karak is city and Yuch is, of course, village. And it's important to notice also Karakavari as contrasted with Keravari. Karakavari means, even in the modern language, we can discern this contrast, right? Karakavari is polite, having a decent mode of life, etc. And this goes even further, like on social media. Sometimes you can see sophisticated contrasts between Geratsi and Juratsi and Gero, because very often people say that Geratsi or Juratsi, especially Juratsi, is a decent word because villagers should not be, of course, treated with lower esteem. Of course, we are not better than, I mean, the city inhabitants are villagers, right? But then there is this distinction, Gero. So this is also based on Gyur, but this is pejorative, and this is really very offending. So, okay, and this is the last page. So Middle Armenian, Michin Hayren, is an intermediate between Classical Armenian and which is Grapar, and modern Armenian, which is Ashkarabar. And its basic time period is between 12th and 16th centuries. So earlier, we can find such designations as vulgar language of the ancestors, Nachniats Ramkoren, or Cilician Armenian, that is Kilikian Hayren, or language of the Low Ages, Torin Daruts Lezu. But actually, as we have already seen, the historical development of classical Armenian and Middle Armenian is not very simple, especially Middle Armenian has a lot of wonderful issues to be studied, and there is a lot yet to find out here, because there are certain facts which clearly show that we didn't have a unitary model of one single Middle Armenian. Like Grapar is basically one Grapar tradition, right? But Middle Armenian is much more complex, much more interesting, and it should be studied very carefully in relation with many, many dialectal issues. And it appears that from the colloquial language which is reflected in the written Grapar tradition, from that form of the living language to Middle Armenian and later to Ashkarabar, there was not one continuum, but many, many sinews, many tendons. This is really very interesting, and I hope in the next lectures, talking about dialects, we will try to clarify this point in greater detail. Thank you for your attention.
I'll stop sharing for a moment, but if there's something that you need to stop there. Thank you for another really rich lecture, so that everyone can see properly. I'm sure there's lots of questions, but I've had lots of questions for both the previous lectures, and I'm held off, so I'm going to take this opportunity to ask one myself to maybe start the discussion. One thing generally, I really like the emphasis at the end on the different languages that's used to talk about the sort of urbane, which is another key term, talking about cities, and then village talk. I always apologize to Greek speakers that I speak Londina Choriathika, which is London village, because it's exactly that. It's people coming from the village to Cyprus and the dialect here. But what I wanted to ask about is that stability in Grapar that you get between the 5th and the 11th centuries, and what you think that demonstrates. Because in those exact same centuries, if you compare with Latin and with Greek, you have really dramatic changes. You can look at we'll take a good example that's a bit of a debate in itself, the dating of Khorenatsi, whether he's 5th century or 8th century. Now, there are really strong historical arguments for why he would be 8th century. He claims that he's writing in the 5th century. As far as I know, all of those debates revolve around the historical arguments. There isn't a linguistic element that's focused in on. Whereas if you were talking about a Greek or a Latin text, you'd be able to point to the use of prefixes or the use of like epi and para and pros. So prefixes and suffixes. The way in which the language itself is used would be a key part of that argument. But with the Khorenatsi dating debate, it's only the historical. So why does Grapar have that stability for 600 years?
This stability is relative. I mean, so there's a lot of Armenologists who study stylistic or other kind of differences between different stages of Grapar. For example, 15th or 16th centuries Grapar, and scholars like Vazgen Ambarchumyan, Lavrenti Hovanesyan, and many others, they studied a lot this stylistic and also grammatical differences between these stages. But the nucleus is still the same. I mean, if we take up dialectal text or Ashkarabar or Middle Armenian or Grapar, and from Grapar side, we can point to many authors from different stages, and they can be considerably different from each other, but not systematically, not as in relatedness with the system. Chronologically, we can see developments and priorities and preferences and many other things, but the whole system is basically, grammatical system is basically the same. There can be preferences like second plural ek or ik. Also, this author can prefer one, the other another one. Also, this parallelism can be discussed different ways. But these are just minor or specific cases. As a system, Grapar is Grapar, and we can distinguish between Grapar and Middle Armenian. Of course, sometimes we see also kind of mixtures. Then a Middle Armenian text, which is considered to be Middle Armenian, it is basically the same. But very often we find there the Grapar forms, and which are not compatible with the Middle Armenian forms which we used to see, and vice versa. So there are, of course, very difficult cases, but mostly this Grapar in its nucleus remain the same. I think the same we can say also about the other classical languages. It depends on the what we mean by considerable difference or systematic difference. Right. So in this way, I would say that Grapar and Ichin Hayren, Middle Armenian, and Ashkarabar can be of significant differences as taken as a complex, as a system. But as far as the issue of with Khorenatsi is concerned, here also we can use. Yes, people usually takes this historical approach, but one can also talk about linguistic approach. For example, there are no Arabic loans in Moses Khorenatsi, and also there is this strong like and use also for this Hellenophile style, and also preference for Greek culture, etc. And of course, the trivial fact is that we don't have the original portion. And what about the original? We don't have any manuscript which is at least 2 or 3 centuries apart from the original presumed time, 5th century. Yeah. So it was written most probably. I stick on the idea that Moses Khorenatsi was 5th century, but of course we don't have its original. We find manuscripts which have been written 7 or 8 or 9 centuries after this time. Yeah. So it's imaginable how much differences we can expect. And also because Khorenatsi, for a long time, it was used as a handbook, this book. So many times scribes or editors could take the liberty to bring some changes. And for this reason, there are these historical anachronisms, right? Because if someone has this as a handbook, then he lives in 8th century or 7th century, but he sees that there is something which is missing there or it's represented differently, then he edits it. So we should not blame Khorenatsi in all these things, because we don't. So there is this presumption, right, of innocence. So we don't have any 5th century or even 7th or 8th or 9th century manuscript which would be closer to the original. So all these anachronisms can be explained as later intrusions of editions. And again, the language. This is my impression, but also I talked to several scholars like Professor Weitenberg, sorry, for my supervisor and some others, and they also agree with me that one thing is the approach of historians, but the other is to take into account also linguistic evidence, and linguistically, Khorenatsi somehow fits with the second part of the 5th century, and it has also some resemblance with the first part of 6th century. So yeah, basically, according to the language, we can see that Khorenatsi, linguistically, we don't have many solid reasons to place him. This can be later reworking or later inclusions. So Khorenatsi is such so abundant evidence from different sides of Armenian culture, and this very famous Artashisyan, Al-Samana Karesh, Gokhtan epic songs, and many other things, and also his language. So many things point to his original time period. So I believe Khorenatsi lived in. But of course, I accept that one should discuss this, and also the historians, how these transitions came into existence, and we should admit the fact of existence of these anachronisms. So the discussion is there. So it's not because Halatians or Robert Thompson or the others are enemies of Armenians, but of course sometimes Robert Thompson and some others are formulate sharply, and I also dislike that. But of course one should take this without any emotions, and just to study as well as the scientific methods allow.
In certain translation of certain foreign words or names, like Rome or rhetoric, in Armenia we put a h before the r. Why do we do that? Rome and Retor.
Because Armenian disliked initial r and r. So this phenomenon exists in different languages, and also in Armenian in different periods. Even in more recent periods, in my dialect, in Lori, so instead of Razmik, we say Harazmik. There are famous jokes, like for example, one wants to remember the name of his very important relative, so it starts with her. Hrach? No, Harant? No, Haraj? No, Harazmik. So this is automatic in some dialectal areas. And, Razmik, Harazmik, yes, not. Yes, I mentioned Lori because it's very typical this phenomenon, and also I am from this region. But of course, it's not only in this area. And the constraint of initial r or r comes from the prehistorical times. So even Indo-European is now claimed to not to have had initial r. So whenever we have a traditional r, r, then there was a laryngeal before that. So now the orthodox laryngeal theory, which is very widespread among Indo-Europeanists, they say that not a word Indo-European word starts with r, but it is with either first or second or third laryngeal. R. It was r, and then this h dropped. And so Armenian disliked, also like many other languages of Indo-European world, and also the Urartian and some others. So they dislike initial r. So whenever we have a secondary reason to start with a word with r, for example, Indo-European prater became metathesized in Armenian regularly because Armenian does not tolerate stop and then sequence of stop and then resonant. Berra. This must be metathesized. This is a very strict rule. Prater becomes rbair, and then the similatory change yerbair. You see, ye is added here because rbair, a word in Armenian cannot start with r, and this is still discernible now, right? So we always say that only Rope and Rafi start with r. So actually, Armenian doesn't have initial r. Or, for example, if Armenian borrowed words from Iranian starting with r, like ram, group of people or animals, then this becomes geram. Of course, the Armenian solves this problem with intrusion of prothetic vowel, because Armenian articulatory system does not tolerate initial r. So then it must be amended automatically, spontaneously, of course, either a or a. And Yerang is the same. Yerang is the same. This from middle Armenian, from middle Iranian rang, which means color. In older time, we borrowed Yerang, so with addition of this, but the root was rang. And in modern period, we reborrowed this again from already modern Persian in the form rang. You see again, not rang, but rang. So in different periods, some amendation should be made. So something should be made so that the word becomes acceptable for Armenian. Yes. So either prothetic vowel or her, like rudic, herudic, etc., which we already mentioned. Yes, and this concerns also r. From older Indo-European period. If we had initial sr, then this becomes r. And again, for example, sruti, which means rivers or rivulet of this kind of things. Then with the loss of t and with addition of a, it becomes aru. And this is very long, since long accepted etymology. Sruti becomes ru and aru. Yeah, because it cannot tolerate neither r nor r. Right, question?
Yeah. There's a traditional Eastern Pesach, the Stepan instead of Stepan. Is that because of two consonants together, or is it related to what you're talking about?
Yes, it's we call this prothetic vowel, prothetic Stepan. It is difficult to pronounce Stepan without any helping Of course, in different periods, there has been some discussions whether this is still observable or not. Amalia Khachaturian studied this question, and she says that this is not sound anymore, but phonetically, and in our association, it is there, and for this reason, we cannot say spa-esh, the officers, but spa-nesh, because a spa is in Armenian treated as disyllabic word, spa. Without this, the sense of this whether or not now is in colloquial in Koine system of modern Armenian, whether or not these speakers pronounce clearly this but still its figure is there. It is sensible, and it is its strong influence. For this reason, we treat this kind of words as disyllabic, and we mark ner and not er, plural markers. Spa, not spa-er, but spa-ner. So this means that this should be taken seriously, whether or not it is now pronounced clearly. Yerangi,
which everybody knows as Barsh Hadi Barsh. He didn't write Barsh about originality. He wrote Yerangi. Now, where does that come from?
No idea. This is a special issue. I should take a look.
You just mentioned that.
Yarangi, I mean, I can guess. I don't know the prehistory of this song, and yes, I should study the case in order to see whether it is the word for Yarangi.
And we still don't know, but he doesn't mention Baba. It's the same dance. Yarangi.
And why is it called Yarangi?
I'm asking you.
Oh, no, I can't tell this without any investigation. I should take a look and I'm not sure whether. Of course.
You mentioned in ancient Armenian dress was on penultimate syllable. How do we know this?
We know this because no, of course, but we see the behavior of phonemes in different parts of the word, in different word positions. Like for example, I mentioned the Indo-European form peruti, which means last year, and it becomes in Armenian heru, heru, accented on u, but then the last syllable dropped. Then it should be non-accented. So this is one important thing. There are also other clues, like it's difficult. So without a whiteboard or without systematic, but I will mention also some other examples. Like we have Indo-European mrto, which means mortal etymologically, but you can recognize which word is mard, right? Mard, but it's significant that its genitive form is mardoi, so o is preserved here. Okay. Here, please be careful. It's a really very significant point as to your question. So we have this paradigm in classical Armenian, mard and genitive mardoi, right? And Indo-European reconstructible protoforms are mrto, disyllabic word, 2 syllables. Mrto, and etymologically it means, as I said, mortal. To is a suffix, and mer is 0 grade of the verbal stem mer, from which we have meranim, so to die. So Mart, a human being, is considered in contrast with gods as a mortal, not immortal, but mortal. So mrto means immortal, and it becomes the word for human being, mard. So imagine this paradigm, nominative mrto, 2 syllables, and this is preserved in Armenian as mard without the o. O is lost. The genitive in other Indo-European languages of this o stem, genitive has not os but osio, 1 syllable longer. So genitive of mrto was mrtosio. You see, and then accent is again on penultimate, Martirosyan. Again, the last O dropped, and we are left with Mardoi. For this reason, we have here nominative Mard and genitive Mardoi. So this scenario is discerned in the paradigm throughout. Indo-European Mrtos becomes Mard, but genitive Mrtosyo, 3-syllabic word, it becomes Mardoi. So this is a systematic thing, and also studying etymologically the whole vocabulary and all the morphological and phonological system. We see that this functions in all the reliable systematic things.
Amazing how much scientific logic there is behind this.
And then also this, if I say that the genitive was osio, this doesn't mean that I'm talking about an abstract conjecture or anything this osio was really the genitive marker in other Indo-European languages. Like svopnos is the word for sleep, kun, and Sanskrit has svapna, and genitive is svapnasya, right? Greek is hypnos, so we know this hypnos, right? It's from this. And genitive is hypnoio, the loss of s, like in Armenian, hypnosio, hypnoio. So this is a systematic thing. Again, Armenian, Greek, and Indo-Iranian. But in Armenian, unlike Greek and Indo-Iranian, we had this law of loss of final unaccented syllable, which is called syncope. Apocopy. So for this reason, we have the same grammatical forms, but with different outcomes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a little bit of a quick one. I've had several that have gone sort of around the room, but before the invention of the alphabet, Armenian most of it was written in other languages. Could you tell us a bit about that? What languages, what alphabets, not languages, I meant to say alphabets, Armenian in using other alphabets. Is there much evidence?
There are some inscriptions and other sources. When in Armenia we find, for example, Aramaic inscriptions, like those which I mentioned in the context. So he says that there are Artaxes made Sammana Karer, this terminus on the stones which marked borders, right? And it is, and there are inscriptions on them on Aramaic language, in Aramaic language. So Armenians is in the Armenian system. It was used for this inscription because there was no Armenian script, and so they used Aramaic. And there are also Greek and Latin inscriptions, and so in the territory of Armenian Highlands and in adjacent areas, written culture was there and used in different occasions, in different parts, differently, etc. And Artak Movsisyan wrote a book years ago, and now another one posthumously. It has been published. So all the written systems which have been used in our area, but of course the question is which kind of connection do Armenians have with them? I mean, if they use Aramaic inscription or if they used hieroglyphic Luwian, this is very hypothetical, and also others. But so we should clarify whether they just use the foreign language, and this is the case mostly. Like if we find in Garni or in Sisyan or in other places a Greek or Aramaic or Latin inscription, okay, so this speaks about the knowledge of written culture among Armenians. So they knew what is a written culture. They used many systems, but we don't have evidence that they used this system for writing Armenian. So excuse me, before that, so they used many systems like Aramaic, Greek, but together with the language. So they didn't use those letters to write an Armenian text with them. Why is it so surprising? Because they didn't have a script, their own of their own origin, so that they used others. Yes, I could agree that why they didn't borrow any written system before that, because usually the alphabet, or generally speaking, written system is something which is inclined to be borrowed. I mean, not invented from zero. So whenever one has in a certain geographic area in a cultural environment, invention of a written system, then it is it shows tendency to be borrowed by neighboring cultures, and it spreads easily from culture to from land to land. But somehow we don't have evidence for Armenians that they use that, and so this is the case. And again, it's not inconceivable or something very, very impossible that Armenians took part also somehow in, for example, in hieroglyphic Urartian tradition. Maybe earlier I said hieroglyphic Luvian, but this is something else. This is Anatolian language, and they also have hieroglyphic written culture next to cuneiform. But there is also this hieroglyphic Urartian, which, as I said before, is not yet read very well. I mean, it's still subject for investigation, right? But there has been some attempts to read this on Armenian basis. Some are more or less scientific, but the others are totally unacceptable, like Hovhannes Karagözyan's trial. So it's because Armenians were present in the Urartian period. This is not something absolutely impossible, right? So the Armenians in Urartian palace, one can imagine presence of literary educated Armenian people, and they could write probably in cuneiform or also in hieroglyphic. And for this reason, some formulae or some other phenomena can be found out in these systems, right? So this is open to discussion. But the real usage of these scripts for Armenian texts, physically, we don't have yet at our disposal.
Well, we were told from the age of 5 at our school in Cyprus that Mesrop invented the alphabet so that we could stop using the Greek alphabet, writing the Armenian words in the Greek language, that he wanted to stop that and invented alphabets so that we would write our own language in our own words in our own language. And this thing was just a wishful thinking from our teachers.
Yes, and but maybe there is also some reason to think that there has been some attempts of writing with different alphabets, different languages. For example, there is this very famous Greek papyrus, which has been studied by James Clarkson and by many other good scholars. It's very old, and it has been written in Armenian characters, but it is Greek. So there are different kinds of textual samples, but in general, I mean, we don't have solid texts using certain written system for Armenian language. But we have some other mixed cases, and also Armenians before Mesrop Martirosyan used different languages, mostly not the foreign alphabets to write an Armenian text, but so if they don't have Armenian written system, then they write just Aramaic. Not only the script, they use not only the script, but also the language. And so for this reason, these inscriptions are Greek, Latin, Aramaic. And in transliteration. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. Mm-hmm. Oh. With Armenian letters? No. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah. Mhm.
There was-
Yeah. Mhm.
So I think after nearly 2.5 hours of talking in linguistics, we better express but thank you so much for another
Thank you very much for your involvement and attention. Thank you.